Coming up, space is hard.
Jupiter is pretty.
And space planes. Stay tuned. Tomorrow begins right now.
Hello and welcome to Tomorrow, episode 9.27 for September 3rd, 2016. And let's go ahead and get started by looking at our Tomorrow Premier patrons. These are folks who have given us $10 or more per episode for the show, and they get access to the whole enchilada. They get our Slack channel, they get early access to all of our YouTube videos, and they are wonderful people, and we are very glad to have them supporting our show here. So if you would like to help crowdfund the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. And I am Jared Head, and of course I've got my co-host today, Space Mike, and we are going to have to start off on a bit of a somber note this week because of something that happened a few days ago. So Mike, go ahead and take it away, and we'll talk about this.
So yeah, at approximately 13:07 Coordinated Universal Time on Thursday, September 1st, SpaceX unfortunately experienced an anomaly during fueling operations for a static test fire. And the ramifications of this aren't fully understood yet, but we do have some footage of the aftermath of this event. And all we know so far is that the anomaly started somewhere around the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. And unfortunately, both the Falcon 9 and its payload, the Amos 6 satellite, were lost. And with this, the anomaly started at T-8 minutes before the test was supposed to begin, while the propellant was being loaded into both stages of the rocket at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Thankfully, though, the pad was clear of all human activity when the anomaly occurred, and there were no injuries. And I did want to quote directly from a press release issued by SpaceX yesterday, where they say, "To identify the root cause of the anomaly, SpaceX began its investigation immediately after the loss, consistent with accident investigation plans prepared for such a contingency. These plans include the preservation of all possible evidence and the assembly of an accident investigation team, with oversight by the Federal Aviation Administration and participation by NASA, the United States Air Force, and other industry experts. We are currently in the early process of reviewing approximately 3,000 channels of telemetry and video data, covering a time period of just 35 to 55 milliseconds. As for the launch pad itself, our teams are now investigating the status of Space Launch Complex 40. The pad clearly incurred damage, but the scope has yet to be fully determined. We will share more data as it becomes available. SpaceX currently operates 3 launch pads, 2 in Florida and 1 in California at Vandenberg Air Force Base. SpaceX's other launch sites were not affected by yesterday's events. Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg Air Force Base is in the final stages of an operational upgrade, and Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center remains on schedule to be operational in November. Both pads are capable of supporting Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy launches. We are confident the 2 launch pads can support our return to flight and fulfill our upcoming manifest needs. So as I said, the ramifications of this are still not fully known. SpaceX did plan to launch 8 more satellites through the rest of this year, 2016, 3 of those from Vandenberg Air Force Base. And however long it takes to return the SpaceX vehicle to return it to flight, they can at least still do some of those missions from Vandenberg Air Force Base if cleared to launch this year. But until the company and all of the investigation teams has more information, there's just no way of knowing when SpaceX will be able to return to flight. And about the payload itself, the Amos 6 satellite, which we actually have a picture of during its initial launch preparations, It was built by Israel's Spacecom Limited, who's going to be operating the satellite, or who was going to be operating the satellite. And they were going to be leasing capacity on this advanced communication satellite to Facebook and to Eutelsat. And Facebook was going to be using this to provide internet access to sub-Saharan Africa. And it was fully owned, though, by Spacecom. And fortunately, the satellite was insured for both pre-launch operations and in-flight operations in the event of the loss of vehicles. So at least they're covered for that. But this launch does put into question the sale of Spacecom Limited to a Chinese conglomerate. And even so, there are several companies who are associated with SpaceX whose stocks have dropped. Even Spacecom has dropped, but other companies such as SES and Intelsat have dropped in the stock market. And it's going to be a while before this recovers from this, but until we have more information, that's really all we know at this point.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to make, Space Mike, is that we're still just barely 48 hours after this anomaly has occurred. So if anybody says right now that they know what happened to the SpaceX rocket, I can guarantee you 100% that they have no clue what they're talking about, because it just has not been enough time to allow a proper investigation to go forward. So the bottom line is that, frankly, I'm fairly confident in saying that I don't know what happened to the rocket. You don't know what happened to the rocket either, and I'm pretty confident that most of the people who say they know what's going on, you don't know what happened to the rocket. It's just been too little time since then, and we're not going to speculate on the show what happened to the rocket either. We're just going to wait for that report to come out whenever it eventually does, and then we can talk about it then. But until then, it's a big question mark as to what occurred, and we'll let SpaceX handle their investigation as they will. So, and that's how we'll look at it for now. But also talking about the Cape as well, we've got an upcoming mission going to be occurring from the Cape with osiris-rex launching on September 8th. Now, NASA has said that initial checks of the launch site, Space Launch Complex 41, the osiris-rex in the United Launch Alliance Atlas V 411, is that they are okay and that they are set to fly. And this was a very big deal because Space Launch Complex 41 is only 1.1 miles away from SpaceX's Space Launch Complex 40. So the flight readiness review was held on this previous Thursday, September 1st, and it was to evaluate the launch vehicle and osiris-rex, and both were given a clean bill of health, allowing for launch processing to move forward. Now, we'll be launching on an Atlas V 411, which that means it has a 4-meter payload fairing, one solid rocket booster, and a single-engine Centaur upper stage. It's set to launch at 23:05 UTC on September 8th, with the window extending 2 hours to 1:05 Coordinated Universal Time on September 9th. And for those of you who are on the East Coast, that is from 7:05 to 9:05 p.m. on September 8th. And for those of us on the West Coast here, that is going to be at 4:05 to 6:05 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So everything's looking fine there, and that was a little bit of a worry because the launch pad was so close to SpaceX's launch pad, but everything looks fine there, and we're looking forward to seeing that mission launch this Thursday. And Space Mike, back to you.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just a problem that occurred in Florida this week at the Cape. It's also something on the other side of the world, too, that appears to have had a problem as well.
That's right. It's been a weird week. So just the day prior to this SpaceX anomaly, China apparently suffered a launch failure. And this was on Wednesday, August the 31st at 18:53 Coordinated Universal Time from the Taiyuan Satellite Launch Center. They were launching a Long March 4C rocket, which is the type of rocket that has no boosters. We do have a photo that is unclear whether or not this is a stock photo or a photo of the initial launch. And that is a 4C Long March 4C configuration, though. No launch footage has surfaced as of yet, but strange reports have been coming in from Twitter that the rocket failed in flight. During Chinese launches, the first stage booster and any side-mounted boosters have predetermined landing zones or crash zones where those stages would drop after they're separated from the upper stages. And as normal, a lot of the locals and the Chinese government recover those pieces of wreckage. wreckage. And the reports coming in from this is that not only are they looking for the expected wreckage from the first stage, but they're also looking for wreckage from the payload as well. And something else that adds kind of a bit of mystery to this is the Chinese government and Chinese media have been totally silent as to whether or not this launch was a success or a failure. In fact, even the initial articles reporting that the launch was initially successful have been taken down. And that picture, these pictures that you've been seeing in that first picture of the night launch was the only thing that still remained from those articles. So with this, again, we can't really speculate. We do not know what happened, and we'll have to wait and see if there are updates about the survival of the payload, which was the Galfin 10, a civilian-operated high-res Earth imaging satellite. So until we know information, it looks like just from the reports coming in that they might have suffered a launch failure, but unless we hear anything else, they might have been able to do this successfully, or maybe these are just old pictures that are somehow being spread as new information. Again, we don't know, but that's what's been coming out of China for this week.
Yeah, so overall not a very good week for space flight. At least in terms of launch providing. So, but I do have some good news from the outer solar system. So let's kind of turn it around here and talk about something really, really good, which is that Juno, the NASA probe that is orbiting around Jupiter right now, has returned its first data from its first close pass. So we talked about the close pass last week because our show actually happened several hours after its closest approach to Jupiter. And now this week, we have the raw data to show you. Now let's take a look at this unbelievable image right here. This is the first high-quality imagery of Jupiter's polar regions. Now, the spacecraft that previously visited Jupiter, the two Pioneer spacecraft and the two Voyagers in the 70s, and Galileo in the 1990s, Cassini in the early 2000s, and New Horizons in the late 2000s, they did not really get great imagery of the polar regions of Jupiter's atmosphere. But here we are. We've got a wonderful imagery because of Juno being in a polar orbit around Jupiter. Now, this shows us that there is nothing like Saturn's hexagonal cloud structures near the South Pole. And Juno also viewed Jupiter's atmosphere in infrared to take a look at the aurorae in incredible detail. And you just look at this and you compare this to the best of the Hubble images that we have. And this is just absolutely stunning. And they're talking about this aurorae actually appearing to sort of spiral upwards in and on itself there. And, you know, Jupiter's just a pretty dynamic place to begin with. But the scientists are saying that they are initially quite surprised with just how dynamic the aurorae and some of Jupiter's polar atmosphere is looking compared to what they expected. So Juno has one more 53-day orbit around Jupiter. And then it will perform an engine burn on October 19th that will place it into its 14-day science orbit, which it will stay in until February 2018. And of course, we'll have to see what happens at that point because it is flying through those intense radiation belts around Jupiter. And basically, we're expecting it to fry the spacecraft by that point in time. So we'll probably dispose of the spacecraft in February 2018. But, you know, it might have been built exceptionally well, as we seem to do with spacecraft, and there might be a slight extension to that mission, so we'll have to see. Now, also some more good news as well, Space Mike. Go ahead and tell us some really good news from New Zealand.
Yeah, this could have turned out to be some really bad news, but meanwhile in New Zealand, there is a new launch pad that is under construction from Rocket Lab, and about 266 kilometers, or about 165 miles off the northeastern coast of New Zealand, there was a 7.1 magnitude earthquake, the strongest earthquake that has been felt in that region for over 20 years. And there was no damage to their new launch site. We have the footage here that was taken from a still video a while ago from a new video that Rocket Lab updated. And with this, it was just completely undamaged. And there have been no reports of any even injuries or fatalities or major damage in New Zealand itself. So very good luck. And I'm very happy about this. And with this, Rocket Lab is hoping to be launching their Electron rocket from this site. They're hoping to begin test flights at this site later later this year and begin commercial launches with customer payloads, including Moon Express, early next year. And so, very good news. This could have turned out very badly, but thankfully everything was okay. I'm glad that New Zealand itself didn't suffer anything. And not to be a downer, but I did just want to give a shout out to the folks over in Italy who unfortunately suffered a lower magnitude earthquake, but there have been some fatalities there. But again, this is another way that space is able to help with disaster relief. They've been able to use GPS and satellite imaging services to inspect the rubble, and even some lives have even been saved already because of satellite positioning, some people whose cell phones were on. So just another way that space affects our daily lives and is able to help even in the darkest times.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that's part of the European Space Agency's ambitious Copernicus project, if I'm recalling correctly, which they actually allow any country access to that, which is just fantastic for their emergency response. They were even using that system during the major floods in Louisiana as well, here in the United States just a couple weeks ago. So fantastic, just showing the amazing collaboration that space allows us to have for helping everybody in the world. Now, speaking of worlds, I want to go a little bit further out to the outer solar system, because the hunt for Planet 9, yes, Ben, Planet 9, is revealing that there are actually these extremely distant objects that we have in our own solar system. Now, a team at Northern Arizona University has been hunting for Planet 9. They're part of the team that actually originally proposed the concept of a hypothetical planet. It was Mike Brown and Konstantin Batyan who did the computations that ended up determining where it may be at based upon the work that this team has done. And they have found a cache of new, what they call extreme objects in the solar system's Kuiper belt. Now, looking at the orbits of these objects allows scientists to narrow down where that hypothetical orbit of the potential Planet 9 may be. Now, two of these new objects, 2014 SR349 and 2013 FT28, line up with the current computer models with an expected Planet 9 based upon Mike Brown and Konstantin Batyan's computations. Now, another very interesting object that was found with this is called 2014 FE72, and it appears to be an object from the inner Oort cloud. That's because its orbit takes it out nearly 3,800 astronomical units. So one astronomical unit is the average distance between the Earth and the Sun, so 3,800 times the average distance between the Earth and the Sun. So that would mean that its orbit is roughly 86,000 years long. And if this really does turn out to be a Oort cloud object, this would, as far as I know in terms of astronomy, be the first time we have ever detected an object from the Oort cloud. So that may be a potential thing to go take a look at with some kind of super fast, super small probe that we were sort of talking about with small sats in some of our previous episodes. So some very exciting stuff happening on the outskirts of our solar system. So we are going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking about space planes, everyone's favorite majestic-looking space vehicle. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back after this break.
We've always looked to the stars. They guide us, give us comfort, help us find our way. We see ourselves out there. When we look up, it inspires us. And we long for something we don't yet know. We yearn to go there. So, we venture forth.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not.
Many think we stopped exploring. But we know our journey didn't end. We've only just begun.
Orion is functioning perfectly at this point.
Come with us and explore tomorrow.
And welcome back to Tomorrow. Need a little bit of an inspirational, upbeat, motivational commercial segment after that super depressisode news segment. But before we get into our much happier main topic, I would like to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of Tomorrow who would be given at least $10 to this specific episode. These are our Tomorrow Premier members. We've also got our Tomorrow Producers. These are people who have contributed $5 or more to this specific episode. To find out how you can help contribute to the shows of Tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. Super depressing!
I'm sorry!
Mike was like,
I'm sorry, guys. Like, it's just not been, it's been one of those weeks.
It was a bad week for space.
Yes.
It was.
Not the best week ever.
Actually, in the some of the videos that were posted to our Facebook channel, so facebook.com/TMRO.tv, there was some additional footage that we weren't allowed to show on this particular show. We weren't able to get the rights to. And one of the comments in there actually came from Christian, who said, I think this evidence is for the need to move away from conventional rockets in order to get to space. Companies like Reaction Engines, Skylon, and X-Core, which have the links, have the right idea. Space planes are the way forward. And that actually sparked some interesting conversation about the space planes and kind of paths forward and safety and things like that. Yeah. And kind of start off, I'll start off by saying I'm a huge fan of Dream Chaser, personally.
Me too.
Dream Chaser, for those who don't know, is from
Sierra Nevada.
Sierra Nevada. I'm like, orbital, no. It's from Sierra Nevada. Think of it like a miniature space shuttle. They can bring up crew or cargo, depending upon the configuration. It can go to low Earth orbit. It's actually an incredible little vehicle. I'm actually very excited about it. However, it launches on a traditional rocket, and that's part of the reason why I like it, because you've got your traditional rocket stick on the bottom and the space plane that sits on top. So if you have any sort of issue with the rocket, the space plane can kind of break away and you're good to go.
Yeah.
But then that brings up actually Space Mike. I think you're pretty well versed on reaction engines, Skylon, and the Sabre drive. So why don't you describe for us what is Skylon, that space plane?
So with the Skylon spaceplane, the company that makes it, Reaction Engine, is planning on a new type of technology to have an air-breathing engine that would pull oxidizer from the atmosphere itself. And the whole idea behind this is to have a single-stage-to-orbit vehicle, something that would not be launching on a traditional rocket, but that would be able to take off from a runway under its own power, and then it has enough fuel on board that once it reaches a certain point in the atmosphere, and there's not enough oxidizer that it would be able to extract from the atmosphere, it's able to switch over to its own supply of oxidizer and change a little bit how the engines would be able to burn and get the rest of the way into orbit with that system. And it's a very ambitious system, and they've been working on it for many years, and they have had some progress over the past several years, and even the European Space Agency and the British government have looked at funding and supporting reaction engines, and if it's successful, it could be a game changer in the space flight industry.
All right, so we've got those two orbital space planes, the Skylon and the Dream Chaser, but then we've actually got a couple of... Go ahead.
Before we move on to some of the other type of space planes, we also have robotic space planes like the X-37B, which is conducting a bunch of secretive experiments in orbit, but it also has the same type of capability and benefits with space planes of being able to land sensitive equipment at a runway in a timely manner. And although with the X-37 it's meant to be up in space for quite a long time, there are other nations who are looking to have their own X-37B. China is working on their own sort of unmanned space spaceplane system, as well as India is working on their own unmanned spaceplane system, which they would hope to eventually upgrade to a manned spaceplane. So it's very interesting, the sort of capabilities that they can get from that.
And the X-37B really is like a miniature space shuttle. It even looks like the old school NASA space shuttle, just mini. And it sits atop, that goes into an Atlas, or is that an Atlas or Delta launch?
Atlas,
That's an Atlas 5.
That's an Atlas 5 in the 501 configuration.
Yeah, meaning a 5-meter fairing, 0 solids, and one upper stage
One engine Centaur.
Yep, exactly. So there are also, so those are all the orbital space planes, but we also have a couple of suborbital space planes. Jared, talk to me about Lynx and Virgin.
Yes, you've got X-Corps' Lynx suborbital space plane, which is essentially a suborbital space plane goes up and then it comes back down. So
It kind of more comes down like this, though.
Yeah, it kind of
bleeds off that energy.
Yeah, a little bit more like that. But essentially, it just goes above that common line, the 100-kilometer mark, and allows you several minutes of microgravity, and then returns your payload and passengers to the starting point in which you began. So X-Corps has the Lynx, which they were developing, although X-Corps has kind of sort of eased back a little bit from that and gone more into engine development from the middle point of this year. But they had flown some development vehicles, like their prototype rocket racer. So they actually did fly a vehicle with a rocket engine, sort of similarly based upon what the X-Corps Lynx would be working with. And then, of course, we also have Virgin Galactic with SpaceShipTwo being developed, sort of the child of the highly successful SpaceShipOne, if you will. And of course, SpaceShipTwo did suffer an accident just about 2 years ago, but they've been working on improving the safety of the vehicle, and they've actually built a second one known as the VSS Unity, and they're actually now doing ground system integration and testing, and that one will be carrying paying customers who have popped out about $250,000 per flight in order to experience the thrill of riding a rocket suborbital. So there's a lot of work going on with them, and one of the nice things about a suborbital space plane is that if you don't necessarily need to launch your payload into space in order for you to perform an experiment, say you only need like really 60 seconds to 120 seconds of microgravity in order to run an experiment, this is a cheaper alternative to, instead of flying your payload into space and having to figure out how to handle all of that and integrate that into, say, like a CubeSat or a NanoRack that would go on the International Space Station. So these are potential outlets, and NASA's actually looked at both of these vehicles as well as potential outlets for running experiments on.
Awesome.
And there's also some international companies as well doing looking at suborbital space planes. Hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll have a representative from Swiss Space Systems, which is looking at a same type of trajectory and also doing air launch, but this time on top of a Boeing 747, I believe. And so that's going to be really interesting to get some more information from them. But there's a lot of different suborbital space planes ideas out there.
We actually had a question in the chat room from Green Jim 2 saying, is a suborbital space plane just a plane?
Yes and no. I mean, with this, the way that Lynx is looking at it is they're actually going to have tiles on the bottom of their space plane, so that if they encounter some pretty strong re-entry forces, that the vehicle wouldn't blow up from that. Dream Chaser, of course, has lots of tiles on it and other systems to help it survive the vacuum of space and re-entry forces and all of that. So, I mean, yes, it's sort of a plane in the sense that that all of these can glide in the atmosphere. Not all of them will be able to maneuver in the atmosphere with engines or their own power. That's where the Lynx space plane is kind of unique, because they can use their rockets in the atmosphere and, I mean, of course, in the atmosphere in order to get up to that the line of space. But they can also use the engines to help get back to their runway. Whereas in the case of Virgin Galactic SpaceShipTwo, their engine will burn out getting up to that boundary of space, and then we'll be gliding back to a runway. So Yes and no is the answer to that, I believe.
I think the difference being, I think the marker between what's the difference between a plane and a space plane is a plane uses air-breathing engines, and a space plane will not be able to use an air-breathing engine, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be out of atmosphere. Air-breathing engines are not viable.
It's a good indicator, I would say.
Yeah.
I would also say a plane flies in the atmosphere, a space plane leaves the atmosphere.
Leaves most of the atmosphere.
Most of the atmosphere.
Okay,
technically.
We've got a lot. We've got
See, it's this thin line that
Yeah.
where you start to argue. Well, what makes space space? Where does it begin? And
So this brought up a really interesting discussion on Facebook, talking about this space planes and how they would be more safe and all of these other fun things. And I thought that was a really interesting topic because I don't think that's actually true.
I don't think so either.
In some instances, it may be, right? So if you look at something like the Dream Chaser, where it's a top-mounted design on top of a traditional rocket, yeah, it probably would be just as safe as a capsule design because it can get away from any sort of anomaly that you may have. But something like Skylon, the argument was Skylon would be, it's next generation engines, it's a much safer technology. Actually, that's not true. Skylon, the Sabre engine that goes in the Skylon is in fact a jet engine. It's essentially a jet engine when it's in atmosphere. And then it converts, I'm oversimplifying this, but it then converts into a rocket engine as it starts to lose air. And it brings with it its oxidizer, liquid oxygen. And so now you've got this airplane where imagine being on an airplane and the engines convert into rockets. Well, unlike sitting on top of a traditional rocket, you have nowhere to go if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
If something happens to one of those engines, it's going to take out your wing.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a survivable instance at that point.
No.
So yeah, the Skylon looks really cool, and on paper it can bring a lot of payload up. But I'm not sure that it's actually that safe of a design.
No, it's definitely not.
Yes.
I would not go on a Skylon myself.
But there's this desire and love of space planes, more so than capsules. We look at capsules and we go, oh, that's 1960s technology. That's 1950s. They did that in Apollo.
Well, yeah,
That's
but at the
old
same
tech.
time, when the selling point of a plane, which is something that traditionally a lot of people go on routinely, is you're sitting upright, you have a little safety belt, maybe you have somebody who brings you food.
Your seat can recline this much?
Sure, even if it's with the Velcro slippers, right, and the little hair caps, that's a little bit more. That's something that we're used to. It's something that we're comfortable with. That's something I've done that before. Sure. That's a huge selling point versus, hey, we're gonna shove you in this tin can. It's you and two other guys you probably don't know very well, and you're just gonna have to sit in your own diaper for a while. Is that okay? Really, is not a huge selling point. It just isn't. So I think for the average person who may or may not ever get a chance to either go in a pod type sort of or capsule type situation or to ride in a space plane,
sure,
right? Those are your two options. Then yeah, of course, space plane is definitely the way I feel more comfortable with. I've done that before. You've been
seen
in
it
a
in
plane.
Science fiction forever, right?
Exactly.
2001: A Space Odyssey, the TWA space plane.
Right.
Pan Am. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Pan Am.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
TWA
sorry.
You should be.
It's
Little
the
different.
TWA Moonliner. That's
Yeah.
right. That was a
Yes.
rocket. Wait. All right. So there's that. You see a lot of old sci-fi with plane-like things that brought us to space, and that was always kind of the vision of the future.
It was, and you do get that added benefit of the ability of what's called cross range. So you can actually, with a capsule, you can move the center of gravity within the capsule, and from that you can actually generate lift. So a lot of people don't realize you can generate lift with a capsule, and you can actually aim it, but you can't generate as much lift as, say, a vehicle with wings, which you can then have a tremendous amount of cross range. And in fact, when you look at some of the designs of the early space shuttle, they looked a little more capsule-ish than they did aircraft-ish, and it was finally moved towards a winged vehicle because the Air Force wanted that cross range ability to be able to basically, lob a very large bomb at someone and then return the vehicle somewhere else in the world besides the United States. So
we can neither confirm nor deny that.
yes, we can neither confirm nor deny that this was going to occur. But as I wanted to point out from one of our viewers in the chat room, Neurotalk D, is that a capsule can do a ballistic re-entry and survive, but a space plane would break up on a re-entry like that. So there are very thin margins with space planes, both in terms of re-entry and also with launch as well. Because you do have to worry about like aerodynamic loading on a space plane at launch.
You have to worry about aerodynamic loading on all
of
things at launch.
But
Let's
a little
be
bit,
fair.
little bit more with.
You have those wings to worry about.
Yes.
Consider those wings are not useful during launch. They're not useful in space, and they're not useful for a good chunk of coming back. Nope. They're only useful once you hit the atmosphere coming back, and that's a very short amount.
And
of
once
your flight.
the atmosphere is thick enough, and
think of all that weight that you're wasting, all that fuel that you need to use to launch those wings, just those wings into space.
Yeah, and those wings have to be pretty big too, because you have to design a wing not like the wings that we have on aircraft here that fly, transonic or subsonic. In our era, you have to deal with hypersonic velocity, so Mach 5 and above. So that means you have to make basically a blunt wing that doesn't really do lift at slow speeds very well. It does lift pretty good at Mach 25, but if you take it down to 500 miles an hour, as they say with the shuttle, a brick with wings. So
is the problem that capsules just aren't cool enough? Can we make a cool capsule?
Well, Scrapcat in the chat room says capsules have a huge drawback, and that is booster diameter. How many people can you pack in? Space planes can be stretched to get more seats. Although I don't think that's necessarily true.
No, you look at Blue Origin, the capsule goes over the...
I was going to say, you don't necessarily have to do it. I mean, I remember some of the early designs in the CST-100 actually had like a really thin Centaur, and it was wider than the diameter of the Centaur was with the CST-100
like
in the early designs.
Situation.
So yeah, that too. So
that's interesting.
And
Mike, you were
something
saying?
else that I like about Dream Chaser is ever since they have updated with their cargo version of the Dream Chaser, originally their crewed version of the Dream Chaser would just have the wings sticking out, and they would have to compensate and have a special payload adapter, but there would be weird phases of flight and weird aerodynamic loads on it. But with the new cargo version, the wings are actually going to be folding, and it's going to be encapsulated in a payload fairing. So they don't have as many of the new aerodynamic challenges as they would have of flying it without a payload fairing. So that's something I like, that even though they are, during ascent, during the launch itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I'm not sure, would you put a crew in something like that where the wings aren't folded out, right? I mean, because... You build a space plane. Hey, that's actually not a terrible idea. You build something like that, a space plane, but then you have a backup landing system like parachutes. It's going to take extra weight. The idea being, if the wings don't fold, come undone, you can still use the surface, the core surface, to barrel through the atmosphere.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, back in the 90s when NASA was developing the crew return vehicle, they sort of had the parasol idea with it, but they also had sort of a backup where if systems went wrong on the crew return vehicle, it would deploy like what's in some small aircraft. It's basically called a ballistic recovery parachute, which it deploys and it brings you straight down from wherever you might be having a problem at. So that'd be pretty neat. I'd like that.
I don't know how viable that is, right? Because I mean,
it might be.
What's going to happen if a wing doesn't unfurl, and then you slam into that atmosphere at, say, Mach 15 or whatever it comes out to?
That's not good.
What's the aerodynamic stress on that vehicle?
The aerodynamic stress is you're going to break up.
Most likely. I think it depends on the state of the wing, right, and how they fold them and what they can do in those failure states.
Well, I would say it would probably be too asymmetrical in order for you to put the
I would generally agree. But I'm wondering if there's a way. Jason519, how much heavier are wings than the propulsive landing fuel? I don't know, but I would assume a lot heavier, right? The fuel's got weight, but it's not that heavy.
Yeah, it's not structural.
The wings are structure, right? So you've got structure and you've got thermal on them as well to deal with all the thermal loading as you come back into the atmosphere. So space planes look cool. Space planes are the future promised to us in the 50s and 60s. Space planes, from a physics perspective, don't work so well.
No, they're evil.
They're bad. They're not safe. And while we have this vision of this safe, awesome future space plane in our heads from sci-fi, it's just not viable today.
Space planes are not your friends.
But
that's the way to put it.
Here's the thing. But something that's not I think I'm going to draw a line in saying that a suborbital space plane isn't as bad because you don't have the amount of energy going into it as you do an orbital space plane.
Yep.
There's a difference there, right? Just like a regular plane is going to be safer than a space plane, and then a suborbital space plane, and a suborbital space plane will be safer than an orbital space plane. Anyhow.
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase it. So.
Yeah.
And I think, too, that with some of the unique capabilities that space planes offer, especially being able to return something to hopefully a gentle landing very quickly, is enough of a reason to go ahead and do it, even though there might be safety issues that a capsule might be safer than a space plane, especially during the flight itself. But, just that alone, I mean, just with the Dream Chaser cargo, having that ability to return cargo safely in a quickly manner is reason enough to go forward with it.
Yeah, and when you're talking cargo, it's a little bit different, right? Because there's not human life at stake.
Yeah.
So, it would suck to lose the cargo, but still, it's a little bit easier to.
Cargo doesn't complain.
Cargo doesn't complain.
Yeah. So.
And you're not wrong, right? Sometimes there are biological experiments on the International Space Station. They want to get them back quickly. If you're landing in the middle of the ocean with a capsule, you have to recover it, you have to put it onto a ship, then you have to get out there to pull the biological off. Whereas if you're using a space plane that's landing like an airplane, you can just go up to it, open the door and grab whatever you need right off of it. You're already on land. It's very quick and easy for you to get to, generally speaking. Which brings up one final point, which is space planes work great on Earth. And they don't. You want to go to Mars? You're going in a capsule. You want to go to Europa? You're going in a capsule.
Yep.
You want to go anywhere else? There's no runway and there's very little atmosphere anywhere else. Those wings are basically useless to you anywhere else in the solar system. So, that's true-ish, right? I mean, you could go to Venus. You could bounce off the clouds on Venus, I suppose. The wings will be disintegrating as you do that.
Wouldn't recommend it. Venus, bad place.
Not hot.
So if you're gonna go to Venus, just walk inside of like a kiln or something. It's a good place to go. So. Submarine.
Dada says submarine.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, a submarine that's at 400 degrees Celsius. So.
All right. So what do you think? If you had an option to go up in a space plane, say Skylon, the other advantage of Skylon, which I didn't mention, is, and one of the things I think is pretty cool, is it's a single-staged orbit. The staging process is actually a risky process for the rocket.
Yes.
Removing that risk is a good thing.
Yes.
However, you're also taking all that extra weight up there with you. So, there are always these trade-offs. But would you go up on a Skylon? Would you go up on a capsule? How would you like to get, all things being equal, how would you like to go to space? A capsule or a space plane or something else? Is there something that we didn't cover that you think makes a whole lot more sense at getting off into space? And I think part of this also comes from the idea that we need to move away from chemical propulsion to get out of our Earth's gravity well. The cold, harsh reality is that's not happening in our lifetime. We do not have the technology to do that. Yeah. Earth's gravity is insane. And electric propulsion's not doing it.
No.
There's just no other real propulsion technology out there.
Electric propulsion works in space because you need a vacuum in order to have electric propulsion work correctly. So it cannot work in any sort of an atmosphere whatsoever. Right. So, I mean, chemical propulsion is really the only one we know at the moment that has a certain amount of energy density to it that allows us to actually be able to make it to orbit with that amount of weight that we want to put on orbit.
And I'm sorry, space elevators are not real.
No, they aren't. So, yeah. You know what's cool about space elevators? That they're in stories.
They're in stories?
Yeah, there's a couple stories with space elevators.
On that note, now that he's ripping on his computer, we're going to take a quick break. Leave your comments on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you want. And speaking of comments, when we come back, comments from our last show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled on some expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving, through the heat keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire.
and welcome back to the show. Now, before we get into our comments from our last week's show, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons of tomorrow who've helped to make this specific segment of this episode happen. These are the people who have contributed $10 or more to this specific episode. Oh, but wait, there's more. We've also got our producers. These are people who've contributed $5 or more to this episode. And we've got our Patreon Plus subscribers. These are people who've contributed $2.50 or more. Those last three groups are going to get access to After Dark as soon as we post it online. They also get access to our Hangouts and a bunch of other really cool things. And we've also got our patrons. These are people who've contributed between 1 penny and $2.49. Although I am getting word that you can no longer contribute 1 penny on Patreon. But somewhere in that range, they have contributed to the show. So that's all it takes to get your name in the show. If you'd like to find out more information on how you can contribute to the shows of tomorrow, head on over to patreon.com/TMRO. All right, Capcom, why don't you take us away? Last week's show was the lunar flashlight.
Yeah, the one we almost lost. Last week's topic was lunar
flashlight. Oh,
flashlight.
that's right. We, for those who don't know, there was no recording last week. We had to turn to YouTube and rip our own show off of YouTube. Yeah, and then edit that down and make that
Good
go.
times.
Doing it right.
Everyone stare at Dutta. All right.
Okay.
All right.
You hit record this time, right?
I saw the lights going around the record deck. Yeah.
Is that because you pushed it?
No.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
All right. First up, Capcom.
First comment comes off of Reddit. This one comes from Brandon Mark. Surprised we're not using this in After Dark. It says a traditional spacecraft versus the CubeSat form factor makes me think of game teas. How do I pronounce that word? Gametes.
From Baston.
Basically, exactly, eggs versus sperm. So a woman's body produces only one quality egg each month and nurtures it carefully using lots of resources. So it's more so that it's fertilized, even more resources to bring it to fruition, and nearly takes a year. Individual eggs, therefore, are very precious and expensive. A man's body, on the other hand, produces hundreds of millions of sperm in the same time frame, and once sent on their path, there are technically no physical requirements from the man's body. Individual sperm, therefore, are ridiculously cheap. I think this analogy fits and has consequences. Cassini, Curiosity, GPS, and giant telecom birds, they are all precious eggs that give great results at great expense. However, the CubeSat phenomenon will also be an important part of space exploration because they're just so simple, easy, and inexpensive comparatively. Quantity has a quality all its own. So there you go. With this analogy in mind, I can only imagine what NASA's CubeSat PowerPoint presentations might look like.
That would be hilarious. It's actually an interesting analogy.
It is.
There are precious things that are very precious and expensive, and there's a lot of effort that goes into them, and you should treat them as such. And there are other things you're like, just see which ones work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a market for both of them, I think.
Absolutely.
All right. Next up.
Next one comes off of Reddit. This was from ChaseIron1. Quite amazing how they can fit a propulsion system on such a small satellite. I did some research and found that one of the initial plans were to equip it with a solar sail.
And there's also the Planetary Society has their solar sail project.
Yeah, light sail.
Light sail that they've flown as well. It's actually a little bit amazing how large that gets in such a tiny, tiny package.
Yeah, well, that's because the sail is an extremely, very, very thin material. I mean, like micrometers thin.
I think it's going to be cool getting these because right now these CubeSats are mostly Earthbound.
Yes.
Right. So they're mostly around Earth, but it's going to be cool when we're able to break from that and send them to the Moon, Mars, wherever.
Yeah.
And mere mortals will be able to send up a CubeSat. It's not going to be a $10 billion project. Be able to send up a little CubeSat and send it to Jupiter and just do whatever you want at Jupiter. I think it's going to be really cool.
Yeah, and just like we mentioned a couple weeks ago, Mars Cube 1 is going to probably end up being the first interplanetary CubeSat being launched with NASA's Mars InSight lander to basically act as a communication relay. So, relieve Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and Mars Odyssey from having to be in position for the landing. So
the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is starting to age too. It's
a
10,
decade.
15?
Yeah, it's 11 years old. So yeah.
Cool. All right, next up.
The next one comes off of Facebook. This is from Austin Downey.
Book of Faces.
In regards to the Ariane 5 launch, why do they seem to accelerate faster?
Space Mike, you want to explain why a rocket gets faster as it jumps off the pad?
That would be due to the very large solid rocket boosters that are on the sides of the Ariane 5. Its main engine, its core engine, is what's known as a sustainer engine. It fires at a certain level of power, and without those big solid rocket boosters, it actually wouldn't be enough to lift it off the pad. So those very powerful solid rocket boosters are, they're not throttled, but they're designed to fire at a very high rate, and that's why it takes off so fast. So that by the time those solid rocket boosters have spent all of their fuel and are separated from the rest of the booster, the sustainer engine is powerful enough to continue on the rest of the way. And with the fuel, the liquid fuel that has burned within the core stage of the Ariane 5 during the time that the solid rocket boosters were burning helps increase the performance of that sustainer engine as well. And this was kind of the same thing with the space transportation system for the space shuttle. With those giant solid rocket boosters, it was able to lift off the pad fairly quickly. Whereas you watch just about any entirely liquid-fueled launch, and they take off the pad pretty slowly, and it takes a while to get up to speed. And of course, as they're burning more fuel and the vehicle becomes lighter, they're able to go faster. But if you have something that has quite a lot of punch, like the solid rocket boosters on the Ariane 5, that's why it takes off at such a high speed.
The other thing to note is that as the rockets are going through the atmosphere, or as they're, what am I trying to say, burning fuel, they're getting lighter. And so as they get lighter, they can move faster because, you know, a couple minutes into flight, they're half the weight they were before, but those engines are still performing at the same amount of thrust. So they can move an object that's half the weight that it was at the launch pad. So they get faster and faster and faster as they burn off their fuel.
Yeah, also you can throttle a solid rocket booster, but you have to do it by taking out the surface area inside that you're planning to burn. So you can throttle down and throttle up a solid rocket booster, and that's actually something that they did for the space transportation system with the space shuttle. Some missions would require more thrust at the beginning, so they would have larger surface area to burn initially. So you can technically throttle, you could, I guess the best way to say is
you can't dynamically throttle.
You could passively throttle a solid rocket booster.
You have to cook it in.
Pre-designed.
I just want to throw that out there
because you can't do that in real time.
Yeah, I just want to throw that out there because there isn't a semi-ability to do it.
There's a lot of hate for solid fuels, and I don't know where that comes from.
I don't particularly care for them.
I don't understand. From a fuel density, from a performance standpoint, you get so much performance out of a solid.
There's a tremendous amount of energy, like you're going to say, a tremendous amount of energy density in them, but at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of risk in using them as well.
There's a tremendous amount of risk in using chemical engines too.
Yeah, but if a chemical engine starts to go wrong, you can shut it down.
That is true. Yeah. Well, not all, I mean, maybe.
Well, assuming that the port mode allows you to do that.
So here's the thing. Okay, that is a quasi-valid argument. Except that if something goes wrong in a chemical engine, by the time it's gone wrong, it's like 10 milliseconds, right? You're not shutting that engine down in 10 milliseconds. It's not going to be a thing. You've lost the vehicle. Or, I mean, that's... Yeah. I mean... I'm not sure I buy that.
Also, have you seen what happens to solid rocket motors when they go kaboom?
Yeah, there's actually a fantastic video. It was a Delta II, I believe it is, at the Cape. And when they go kaboom, oh man, they go kaboom.
That huge plume of material.
For those who don't know what we're talking about, search YouTube for Delta II anomaly. And it basically, a Delta II lifted off the pad, and at the most inopportune time, it lost its solid, and it just was raining solid fuel.
Yeah.
And to your point, which is a fair point, that solid fuel will continue to burn until it's expended itself.
Yes.
Which means it's raining fire down on the parking lot.
Yes.
It's burning out cars.
And often that fuel will probably follow the trajectory that all the debris from your rocket is taking, which means that if you got like a capsule there, capsule better be ready to handle trying to figure out how to deploy everything with a whole bunch of solid fuel around it. So.
Yeah, but that's, I mean,
it's tricky.
It's tricky in both scenarios, and I realize that a lot of rocket scientists don't like solid fuel, and that's fine. I accept that. But I think it gets a bad rap. There are certainly issues with it, especially vibe, right? It's a very vibey, noisy, acoustically intense fuel. Yeah, that sucks. You don't want to be a human just blah, 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 blah. All right, going, I get that. And
GIF
you're
alert,
right.
by the
You
way.
can't you can't shut it down, right?
Yeah.
You're right. But that doesn't. I don't think that makes chemicals that much safer. I just think that there are a different set of constraints that you have to engineer around for chemicals.
Yeah.
So if you're smart about it, you can actually build a decent vehicle using solids.
Yeah.
That's my only thing.
Yeah.
This episode brought to you by Solid
Fair
Rocket Fuel Motors. Mr. Macabar says solids are chemical. I mean,
Okay, come on. Let's not split hairs here.
technically, yeah, but that's not how they're defined. That's not how they're defined in space. Fun other factoid.
Solid liquid, I guess, would be.
Fun other factoid for those who don't know. It's a solid motor or a chemical engine, right? So you don't have a solid engine.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yeah, and we call it a motor because it has no moving parts. So, and an engine has moving parts.
It can it can still gimbal.
Okay.
What?
Yeah, a lot of different ones can.
Well, they do, and actually,
Yeah.
that was. I'm just okay. Apparently, we're going like this in comments. There was a Delta IV launch. Hi, Capcom. There was a Delta IV launch not that long ago. I just learned that they used to have the two solids on either side. They could gimbal independent of each other. Apparently, they've changed that, and they've actually made one locked down. It's just got a locked kind of like locked out, and the other one is the one that gimbals because they realized they only need one to steer the vehicle.
Yeah.
So ULA implemented a cost-saving measure.
Yeah, I was reading too that instead of when they fly with 4 solids on the Delta IV, only 2 of them are capable of gimbaling because they only need that many to gimbal.
I did not know that.
That's pretty cool.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
All right, Capcom.
Next one comes off of YouTube. This one comes from Vertical Toasted. You know what I love about science? You almost never see people speak about it with a huge amount of passion.
Without a huge amount of passion. Kind of like that solid chemical.
Yeah, we just had a very spirited discussion.
Very spirited discussion about solids. And
yes.
If Dave Maston were here right now, he'd be shaking his head at me. Be like, solids.
He'd be like, you mere mortal.
Same thing with Elon. He'd be like, no, you're an idiot. Solids are, no.
You fool.
Yeah, I know. I get it. It's an unpopular opinion, but just the energy density.
Unpopular onion.
Energy density, I don't think you should ignore the energy density of a solid motor.
Okay, well, you know, it's okay to be wrong.
Science is fun.
Yes, it is.
Next up.
You know Bill Nye the Science Guy is getting his own talk show?
Yeah, another one.
On Netflix. It's going to be awesome.
It is. It's about like debunking the debunkers. Right, the whole conspiracy theory, and he's just going to go in and debunk it with science.
It's called Bill Nye Saves the World or something like that.
Yeah, I'm super excited for that.
I'm really hoping the first episode is about flat Earth. That would be great.
It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can say that you can throw science and math at them. They don't comprehend it. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it's like you can talk to your blue in the face. You can have all the proof in the world. You could prove gravity exists by dropping an apple. You'd be like, no. So I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah.
Anyhow. And so when somebody says something about talking about science without enthusiasm, that's like that was the first thing I thought of.
Science!
I feel it's always good to make the point to at least deliver counterpoints and then let somebody decide about that.
I had that happen on a Lyft ride not that long ago. I had to use Lyft to get into work. I use Lyft now because I can tip in the app. And Uber
Lyft is like Uber for those of you who are confused as to why you took an elevator to work.
That would be awesome. We don't have space elevators, but we have like elevators to work. That's
horizontal
really cool.
elevators.
Just want to be clear.
They're called people movers.
Is that like another way of talking about the Hyperloop?
Maybe,
no. I'm in this car ride, and we're going to company X, and he realizes I work there, so he starts going off on these conspiracy theories, and I refuse to acknowledge. Like, a lot of people just ignore it and kind of move on. I won't. Like, if you're gonna engage like that, I'm gonna be like, no, you're wrong. Here's why. Here's the science that backs it up. Well, what about, no, you're wrong. Here's why. Here's the science that backs it up, and I will not back down on that. It was a moderately uncomfortable / passionate car ride for 45 minutes of, no, you're wrong. Here's the science. No, yours wrong. Here's the math and the science. Let's do that math together, shall we? So it was.
Did you give him a tip?
I did, because he did give me a ride.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna. I mean, just because. just because he's wrong doesn't mean I'm not going to tip him.
He did do his job.
He did do his job.
I asked you to
that's
do
true.
one thing. You
That
did
is
the
true.
one thing. That is all I asked of you.
That is true.
That
Yes.
I'm not going to not tip because I don't think you're smart. Anyhow, moving on.
Last comment comes off of YouTube. At least I think it's the last comment. Yeah, okay, good. This one comes from Will B. 15-minute episode. Wait, the episodes are getting posted in sections now, aren't they?
Yeah, we're trying something new. I don't know if it'll stick, but we're seeing how it works. So, as you've noticed, if you go to our TMRO.tv/live page, there's a calendar of all the guests. We are booked up through November with guests at this point, so I hope you guys like that. We've tweaked the format of the show a little bit, so I'll be doing the interviews and they'll be taking care of the space news. We're also extracting that interview segment. It'll be about 15 to 20 minutes or so, and posting it just as its own segment on YouTube. So if you really found that interview interesting and you wanted to share that, but like you didn't need to share the rest of space news or comments, you can share just the interview.
Yep.
Or if you want to see the whole episode, you'll still be able to do that, so you'll have access to both. It'll be a little more the noise ratio on our signal to noise ratio on our YouTube channel is going to not be as good at this point, simply because we've got two of the same thing essentially going up there. But I think you can quickly and easily figure out what's going on. If you really want the whole episode, only the whole episode is being added to our playlist for each season, so that makes it somewhat easy. Then on Facebook, we're actually taking that to another extreme level, because Facebook is more like quick snippets of information, right? It's like 5 minutes or less.
Blurbs.
Yeah, just blah! So we're taking space news and slicing each individual news story out as its own video on our Facebook page. So if you want to just share one of the news stories, maybe about how Planet 10 was doing something really cool, you can, you're welcome. You can share just that off of our Facebook page at facebook.com/tmro.tv. We'll also be posting the full episode on Facebook, and possibly, it's just going to be a whole bunch of stuff. So there's going to be a lot more noise on Facebook, but it gives you an easier ability to share just the specific thing you were interested in on Facebook. So that's what we're trying. It's actually a great deal more effort on our part for all the editing and whatnot. We'll see if it works. Thus far, it's trending like we always kind of trend like this on our graphs. This one went bink when we did this and like huge up and to the right. So the initial data tells us that this is a good thing.
Yes.
Maybe we're wrong. We haven't done it for long enough. We'll try it for a little while, see how it works out, see what you guys do or don't like. We always welcome feedback. So just let us know if you like it, hate it. I've already gotten this is a great idea, this is the worst idea ever. So we'll listen to you guys and see what works. So there you go. That's our show this week. I'd like to thank everyone so much for watching. And I didn't put our next week's guest into the rundown, so I actually have forgotten who we have next week.
Isn't it Swiss Space Systems, I believe?
It might be.
According to the calendar, we're having someone from Generation Orbit come on.
Generation Orbit. That's going to be a fun new one, a new space company, talking about what they're doing, building rockets for small sats and nanosats and
Awesome.
Rockets launchers.
Keeping the theme of really small satellites going.
Oh yeah.
So.
Well, we had that shot. I'm like, this is really cool. I think this is the future. Let's drive that point home.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got a bunch of different companies coming on the show in the near future, and I'm really excited for that one. So stay tuned next week. For those who are watching live, After Dark is up next. For everyone else, it'll be available in a few weeks. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.